Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, as you can see up here, we have a list of a bunch of URL routes that I've created, which are custom lines, which is this button. If you're wondering what site this is on, this is called Brand New Subway. It's meant for New York, but if you're a trainer like me, then you're able to do whatever you want in whatever city you want. And you'll see as the map expands, I've done way too much, but that's what Canada needs. Anyways, there's different categories. These yellow ones are for long distance. The foresty green colors, I don't know how to describe that, but these are for Ontario. The 12 to 15 are for Vancouver. 16 to 19 are the Alberta area. 20 to 23 is the Winnipeg area. 24 to 27 is between Toronto and Ottawa in the Peterborough region. 28, 29, and 30 are commuter lines that could be added to Go, but serviced by Via or Go. 31 to 43, which is the biggest section, is the Windsor to Quebec City corridor. 44 to 49 is Montreal commuter rail lines for Via Rail. And then 50 to 54 is the Atlantic or Maritime provinces. 55 is the Alto high-speed rail route. International A, B, C, and D are for different lines that run between Canada and US. 60 is in Vancouver Island. And then you have the BC bus, which is not a train route, obviously, and it kind of isn't important for this video. And then Via 61 is another Montreal commuter route, but we'll get to that. So let's start off with Via number 1. If we look at the route diagram, you can see it goes between Vancouver, Port Coquitlam, Revelstoke, Banff, Calgary, so on and so forth. I'm not going to read you all this because that will make the video 3 times longer if I do every single one of these routes. But this is Via number 1, or the Canadian, and then follow this yellow line. You can see it curves up, it goes to Sudbury, and curves up and around, and then it's following here, and then this is where I need to check. Nope, that's a different route. Via 1 is still here, and then Via number 1, or the Canadian, continues past Moose Jaw, and it goes down, and then it goes up into Calgary, and then across, and then down into Vancouver. And to make this easier, let's start off with number 2, which is the old Transcontinental, which doesn't run anymore, but it used to under Via ownership. But anyway, it continues the same route as the Canadian until we reach Hope, and then it splits up, and actually it splits down. I didn't really pay attention to this for very long, but anyway, it goes across to Penticton, and then it comes up and crosses over. There's no station, it just crosses over each other there, and then it comes up and it goes across to Edmonton, and then all the way back down, and then to Winnipeg. And then this is where the route differs again in Thunder Bay. Number 2 splits off and goes across an abandoned route between here, which needs to be brought back to life. A bunch of this is not existing or used to exist or is roughly placed due to it being fictional and it being a website, which isn't perfect. Like this line is very rough, but could exist. But anyway, number 2 continues across Cochrane, which is where it meets up with these lines, which we'll get to later again. And then it starts to go through Quebec, and then it meets up with other lines in Mount Laurier, and then it meets up here and ends in Montreal. Okay, so for number 3, we are going to go to Prince Rupert. Now, it starts off at Prince Rupert, goes across to Terrace, continues across to Prince George, loops back up into Jasper, and then Edmonton, where it ends. There's nothing past here for Edmonton on this route. It is just a mountain ski trip route type thing. And that is it for number 3. Now for number 4. Number 4 is on the other side of the country, which I will go find. Okay, so here's number 4. Starts in Halifax. It kind of does this weird route that isn't connected to these other routes, which is going to be said a lot in this video. We're going to get to it. Anyway, the line continues up, connects at Stewiacke, and then it continues all the way through here to Moncton, and then up, following this other line, kind of doing like a skip stop thing, arriving in Rimouski, meeting up with other lines in Rivière-du-Loup, and then ending at Quebec City, which is just Quebec, off in Winnipeg, over here. And then, if you follow the yellow line again, I know there's multiple here, but if you follow this one, and go around here through Dauphin, meet back up in Yorkton, split up again in Hudson. This is just called Hudson's Bay. Yeah, this is a Hudson's Bay thing. This game sometimes is accurate about places that it says. And then it goes through Thompson and up to Churchill. Currently, it is the northernmost route in Canada, and as you can see, yep, it is still the northernmost route in this map too. So that is cool. Now for number 6, if I check here, it goes between Vancouver and Regina. So we'll start in Vancouver again. Here we go, number 6. It follows the same route as always, and then goes through Hope, and then that's where it splits to here, to Penticton, and then instead of going up or anywhere else, it comes across to these cities which aren't served, and I don't know if they've ever been served by Via Rail, but it meets up in Fort Macleod, and then Lethbridge, where this line ends. Again, you will get to it. Goes to Medicine Hat, and then Moose Jaw, and then where this line ends also, because it goes to Regina, and that is the end of that line. Okay, so we are on to number 7, in Fort Frances / International Falls. International Falls is in the US side, over here, and Fort Frances is the Canadian side, in Ontario specifically. Anyway, it starts off here, and it goes to Thunder Bay, then it comes up with this other green route, and then it connects back into Greenstone, which is random northern Ontario. It connects back to these other green lines, that's not Sudbury, that's Gogama, and then goes to Capriole, which is the end of the Balasub, I think, and then goes into, nope, does not go into Sudbury. It comes across here to North Bay, and then down across through Pembroke, and then into Ottawa. So that is the last long distance route. It kind of could be a Ontario route, but I made it yellow, so it's a long distance route. And it's a cross Ontario route, so yeah. Anyway, let's start off back on the same spot with number 8. We got Fort Frances / International Falls. I did not butcher the name this time, so that's fine. It comes up to here in Thunder Bay, where it meets with number 11, which goes up there. But we are now in Red Rock, and then we come across all the way down back into Sudbury, and then it does not go any further. This just ends in Sudbury. So that is number 8. And then number 9 is down here in Toronto. It starts off with number 10 also, which is going to be mentioned now, just like a first for this video. Anyway, it comes up through the Barrie area, goes through not Severn, it's Oswego, and then it comes up this way through North Bay, and then this is actually an Ontario Northland line, and then it meets back up with the 10 at Cochrane, and then it goes up to Moosonee. The 10 comes back down, goes through Timmins, connects with Gogama, and then back into Sudbury, and then it meets back at Oswego, and then follows through that way to Toronto. It technically could go through that way, but let's just say they made a junction so it would go back. Also, color coding is easier that way. Okay, so for number 11, we're starting off in Thunder Bay, so it does not go to the end of the line, although it could, but there's no point, as this is a short connector route between Thunder Bay. It comes up to Nipigon, goes around this way to Greenstone, Armstrong, comes all the way across to these towns and cities that are now along the Canadian, and then it goes through Dugald, and then Winnipeg, and that's where the Ontario lines end. So that is it for the first 11 lines. Let's move. All right, now on to number 12, 13, 14, and 15. These are the Vancouver commuter routes, and we are starting in Vancouver. Duh. It goes to Vancouver, splits off in Burnaby. That should be saying Burnaby. That's fine. And then it goes through all of these cities: New Westminster, Surrey. That is Surrey. That is Delta. And then it ends in White Rock, where because of the border, it becomes the International D, which is also just the Cascades route for Amtrak, except this one ends in Seattle because I'm going like the closest possible area to the border for these international routes, mostly. And then, so 12 technically can just go down all the way down to Seattle, but that we're splitting it here. 13 starts off in Vancouver, goes to Burnaby, then it comes through here, New Westminster, and then it does not continue over here. It goes around this bend, which creates the trackage for this, goes to Augusta's, and then ends in Hope. The 14 line comes back out of there, goes through Chilliwack and the southern side of the river. I don't know what it's called. Does it say? The Fraser River. And then it comes back up through here. So 12, 13, 14, 15 is where the BC bus comes in. It just goes through here. It would also need a lot of random routing because that's a train track bridge here that I made it go across. It's a whole weird thing. It's not the point of the video. Starts off here, North Vancouver. Ignore that, that's a glitch. North Vancouver, West Vancouver, and then, it goes up through coastal cities, semi-coastal cities, goes through Squamish, ends up at Lillooet, and then Williams Lake, and then Quesnel, and then finally Prince George. Here we are with number 16. It starts in Regina, goes through Moose Jaw, comes up through around here, goes through Camrose. Here we zoom in through Edmonton. It goes to here, which is where it ends. It does not go past here. As you can see on this route thing, Edmonton and Regina. 17 also begins here, and it goes up this way. Goes through St. Albert, where it splits off, comes onto these green lines, which we are about to get to as they are next, ends in Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo. That's because there are two towns that are right next to each other. Now, for number 18, right over here, Athabasca, and it comes down, and then it just slithers through, and it goes on this winding route down through Red Deer, Calgary, and then Fort Macleod, and then ending at Lethbridge, which is also met with 6, or via number 6. So that was 18. 19 is a shorter route. It goes between Fort St. John and Grand Prairie, and then ending up in Edmonton. All right, here we are in Winnipeg, where we are going to do Route 20, 21, 22, and 23. So there are two routes that start off going east out of Winnipeg and two that go west. So the two that go west are 20 and 21. As you can see here, they go through Portage la Prairie. They stop at all these areas, and then they come up here, and then they split. So number 21 goes up up being north, and then it splits off to Flin Flon, while number 20 goes through here, through Prince Albert, and then through Meadow Lake, and then this is the line that connects up with the city, and then Wood Buffalo, or Fort McMurray. So those are the two westbounds. Are the eastbounds, or the north and the south one, which are these two, 22 and 23. They go to Dugald, and then 23 goes south and then back, loops around west to Crystal City or Louis. It shows Crystal City here, but it's called Louis. And then the other side we have going through Selkirk. We have 22. It goes north, winds through these small towns, and ends at Grahamdale, or it's actually Gibsonville. Okay, here we have the next lines, 24, 25, 26, and 27, all starting off in Toronto, as you can see here. Now, 24 starts off, and then it splits up into Uxbridge after passing through Stouffville, and it goes up through here, through Haliburton, and then Bancroft, doing this weird bend here, and going up through Pembroke, where 25 and 26 end. However, 24 goes on to Milwaukee, and then Mont Laurier, and then that's 24. 25, backtracking, is through Pembroke, Bancroft, and then goes through these small towns of Apsley, and then all these cities, which are just going to be living North Kawartha mostly, or Kawartha Lakes. But there's Bob Keegan, and then it reaches back into Port Perry and the Scugog region, and then back to Toronto. And then 26 is basically a branch off of 25. It goes same route up through here, comes across to Peterborough, and then up through Lakefield and into the same tracks which lead to Pembroke, and then it ends here. 27 goes through the same tracks again, Toronto to Peterborough, where it splits off and goes through these small towns, and then crossing at Smith Falls, going to Merrickville, Kemptville, and then finally ending up at. So now we are on to 28, 29, 30. So for route number 28, they go through here. They all meet here. The corridor lines pass through here. They don't stop here. 29 continues up through here, going through Orangeville and then ending at Shelburne. Meanwhile, 28 and 30 continue through Woodbridge, Bolton, Tottenham, Beaton, Alston, splitting in Essa or Angus, and then the 28 line goes through Collingwood and ends at Owen Sound, while 30 goes through Penetanguishene and Midland, and then connects back up here. So those are those three. Okay, so here is the corridor lines, these dark blue lines. You have 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, and then 42, which is a big gap, I know, but here is how they will work. 31 goes across through this way, the Kitchener line area, goes through the major cities, then crosses through London, and goes south and then west towards Windsor, which now connects to the international route, or International B. Goes through all these cities in Michigan, the corner of Indiana, and then just goes up into Chicago. 32 goes across through Oakville, Aldershot, around Brantford, and around this little bump, and then back to London, and then instead of following to Windsor, it cuts across to Sarnia. 33 comes out of Toronto, goes through and just cuts across to Niagara Falls, which connects to yet another international route, which is the Maple Leaf route, and it connects down into New York over here. Back up here, we have the 34 and 35 in going through Pickering, Oshawa, Belleville, all these cities. Meets in Napanee with the Picton branch, which stops in Deseronto and Picton. And then that branch also continues up with the 35 to Smith Falls and then into Ottawa, where the 34 continues across the coast of the St. Lawrence River up into Montreal. The 36 starts in Ottawa and comes across here and then back down into Montreal. The 37 continues and goes up through here all the way across and then ends in Quebec. The 38 goes starting from, not from Montreal, it starts also from Ottawa. So you're getting a bunch of even numbers here, starting up from Ottawa, and it goes down this route, comes across here, and then splits north with from the commuter routes of Montreal, goes through Joliet, Shawinigan, and then does a west turn into the scenic cities of Saginaw and Alma. The 39 starts off in Quebec and is a branch that goes to Sept-Îles. The 40 starts off in Montreal over here, and it goes through Longueuil and then St. Hyacinthe, and then across to Sherbrooke, where two commuter lines end. And then it continues up and goes through St. George. There's Lac-Mégantic, which is not served by trains here, but that's a spot of a major train derailment and fire and explosion, which you can learn about on YouTube from other channels. And then the 41 continues the same route until St. Hyacinthe, where it splits off and goes north to Drummondville, meets up with back to Quebec, and then keeps going up until Sept-Îles with the 39. On to the 42, which is this route. This 42 starts up in Toronto and just goes between Toronto and Peterborough. It's basically part of the red corridor, the Kawartha corridor, which is what I named it. Except it's just another route because why not? You can. And then the final route for the corridor is between Ottawa, Brockville, and then ending up in Picton, like I mentioned before. Now, the next routes will be the Montreal corridor routes, which are a big mess. They go between Ottawa and Sherbrooke. And then 61, which we'll get to later because, let's just say, in quotations, it was owned by a different railway or something. And that's how it came to be. So they all start here. It's this plus-shaped terminal. 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, and 49 goes between Montreal, goes north through Montreal East, which is confusing directionally, but okay. And then it comes up through here, loops back to Masouche, and then across where it meets again in Rosemere, and then it comes across here to Dumontan, which is a spot on the actual commuter rail, and then it crosses a river, which would be needing a really expensive bridge, but in this fictional land, we have that. And then it goes through more cities that are on actual commuter rail, and then it comes up back through with the 38 into Ottawa. The 45, which is here, also starts on that same route, doing skip stop, or actually the corridor is doing the skip stop. And the 44 actually, by the looks of it. Yeah. But then it comes through here, goes through Montreal Dorion. Yeah, I said that right, I think. And then it comes around here, goes through all these towns, goes through Dorval, which is the airport, so you can kind of see here. There's closer, and then a massive train yard. And as you can see, the tracks aren't actually aligning here because it's just basic outlines of me clicking and hoping for things to say the correct city name. And then it comes through, back into Montreal. Now, for 46, 47, 48, and 49, they go through here. 46 is there, and 46 comes down here. through Broussard, which is served by the REM, I believe. And then it comes around here through Candiac and ends in Châteauguay, which I probably pronounced wrong, and I apologize for that. Anyway, the next lines start in Montreal again, and then that's where the 48 and 49 go. So the 47, yep, must be up here through Longueuil. Again, I know I'm probably pronouncing these French names really wrong, but yeah. And then, like I said, goes through here, follows another corridor line through and to here, St. Hyacinth. Back to the 48 and the 49, these two, they split off from St. Hubert to Richelieu, and then it splits with the 48 going north, or on the northern section, and 49 on the southern section, and then they meet back up in Sherbrooke. And that's the end of those lines. Okay, here we are in the Atlantic provinces, or the Maritime provinces, whatever you want to call them. And we're starting off, as we're now getting back to, where it starts off at number 4, but we're going back with 51. 51 comes up and goes north, 54 goes that way, 51 comes back up, as you probably know, it goes back up into Stewiacke, and then comes across these cities, and going through Moncton, where it splits through down to Salisbury, through to Hampton, and then across to St. John. And now 50, which I managed to skip somehow, comes through St. John and comes across this way through Fredericton, barely touching the main border, going to Edmundston, and then going to Rivière-du-Loup, and then coming back down into Quebec City, where we have 52. It comes back up north, comes around here through Rimouski, and then at Matinee, it does not split. It follows these lines in through these cities, and then it meets up here. But instead of going back to Halifax, it splits all the way up here to Sydney, or Dominion cities over here. Back to the 53, which, as you can see, ends in Gaspé, with a stop in Murdochville and St. Endemont. So that's from that branch. And then 54, the final line. I know I'm kind of going everywhere right now. I apologize. It comes out of Halifax, goes through Dartmouth, and then comes across here and goes and ends in Digby. So those are the Atlantic provinces lines, and now we move on to the very final lines. Okay, here we are starting off back in Toronto for the final time. Yep. We're starting off with number 55, or the Alto, which goes through in the straighter-ish track to Peterborough, where it splits off on its separate line, going very straight to Ottawa, and then curving around, and then taking a dip before going to Laval, Montreal, coming back up through this route, following the 37 into Trois-Rivières, and then coming up and ending in Quebec City. Now, while we were in Montreal, we skipped one line. That is the International A, or the Vermonter, because as you will see, as we follow it, it comes through, goes south, and into St. Albans, Burlington, Montpelier, Rutland, and all those other Vermont cities. And actually, these aren't Vermont over here, because this is in Massachusetts, and then Connecticut, and then into New York. Over here, International A. And then the final two routes for this review / explanation, which is kind of going poorly, but oh well, starts off in Victoria, British Columbia, on Vancouver Island. These go up through to these smaller towns, which has many stops. Then it gets very far spread out, going across these smaller towns, ending in Nanaimo, Parksville, and going through to Courtenay, and then Campbell River is the ending of that line. So it's a little wiggle of a line that is very dense on one end and very far spread apart on the other end. Back across to the other side of the country for the very, very final time. And thanks for sticking with me if you have. Anyway, starting off with our final line 61, bright orange. And Montreal starts off, goes through Laval, comes up directly north past this Rosemere, and then splits off in Blainville and follows the number 2 through Saint Jerome, Prevost, all these smaller cities, Mont Tremblant, which is very famous in Canada, and then ending finally at Mount Laurier, or Mount Laurier, with the 24 and number 2. And that is the video. I hope you've enjoyed looking at this massive mess. When I zoom in, you can actually see how much lines there are. It's a jumble over here and less of a jumble over there. So I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, that is the video. I'm going to send a link to a Google Sheet that you can look at that will explain this better. So if you want to spend some time looking at that, please do. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye-bye.